Hi, I'm Stephanie from museums.love. Let's talk about mummies. Lots of museums across the world have mummies in their collections, and many of them are exhibited because people love mummies. But oftentimes mummies are exhibited without really being explained. So let me tell you today 5 things that I bet you didn't know about mummies. Number 1. The word mummy can mean all sorts of different things. There are wet mummies from bogs, and there are dry mummies from the desert. Both of these kinds of mummies are bodies that have not decomposed because they're in environments that are so extreme, bacteria don't eat them and decompose them the way that they do under other circumstances. That kind of naturally preserved mummy also exists in Egypt, where the sands are so dry that bodies can dry out instead of decomposing, so they last a long time. But that's not the kind of mummy we're talking about today. Those mummies have been elaborately processed through a series of steps that were meant to preserve the body to keep it as lifelike as possible so that it could serve in the afterlife. Number 2. Mummies were made of all sorts of things other than just the body and the wrappings. Maybe as a kid you dressed up as a mummy for Halloween with your body and either toilet paper or some sort of gauze wrapped around you. That's good enough for Halloween, but the Egyptians had a lot more going on. Because the whole point of Egyptian mummification was to preserve the body for eternity, and cloth alone hardly does that, the Egyptians layered the cloth wrappings with antibacterial resins, either tree sap or tar, to help the preservation. Small precious stones or statuettes could be embedded in the wrappings or inside the body cavity as a way to protect it, to ward off evil so that the body will survive. Number 3. Mummies were fashion victims. Mummies do not look the same throughout the thousands of years of Egyptian history. They look really different. Some mummies look to our eyes relatively lifelike. They're plastered and painted to look like living flesh down to the very eyelashes. While other mummies are painted gold and they look to our eyes not at all lifelike, but they had the symbolic quality of life through gold coloration and a sort of idealized form that was thought to be the most eternal kind of form. Earlier mummies tend to use more of the gold and the idealized beauty, whereas in the Roman period, the Romans come to Egypt with their own tradition of portraiture and use this tradition to paint the deceased and put that portrait onto the mummy in a style that can even look like Rembrandt or something from the Dutch masters. Really beautiful brushwork. Number 4. It wasn't just the pharaohs who were made into mummies. Lots of other people were made into mummies too, and even animals. Fish mummies, bird mummies, crocodile mummies, baboon mummies. Mummification was an industry. It happened on an industrial scale, to the extent that animals were even bred in order to make them into mummies. They were bred in special compounds around temples. They would be killed and mummified and dedicated to the gods. From an animal rights perspective, this is horrible. But from a religious perspective, the Egyptians were doing what they thought would help them most in this life and into the next life. There are even mummified cuts of meat, a leg of lamb, a goose that's been prepared for eating, but they've been mummified in order to be put into a tomb and serve in the afterlife as delicious food. There are even fake mummies. They look like a mummy on the outside, but on the inside they're full of mud or straw, or sometimes little bits of animals like feathers, bones, that maybe were meant to symbolically act like an animal that's been mummified. Number 5. High-tech research is telling us more than ever about mummies. CAT scans, X-rays, and other scanning technologies are being used to discover what's under the wrappings of mummies without having to destroy them. One project even realized that a mummy of a man had a mummy of an ibis inside of it. Another project took a chemical analysis that pushed back the start of mummification 1,000 years, from what was thought to be around 2600 BC all the way to 3600 BC for the first mummies. That's even older than the Egyptian pyramids, some of the oldest Egyptian monuments ever. You can find out more about mummies, animal mummies, and the modern technologies for finding out about mummies on museums.love. I'll see you there.